Every teacher has a unique set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that they've developed throughout their lives. When you can combine that skill set with a favorite pastime and figure out how to monetize it, you end up with a side hustle that's not only profitable, but also joy-giving. In today's episode, we're talking to Dr. Natae Feenstra, a high school guidance counselor turned college professor who has a great side hustle that combines her counseling expertise with her love for running and the outdoors. So let's get to it. This is After School Empire, the podcast that helps teachers like you make extra money by launching and growing their own income-generating side hustles. My name is Tony Neely. I'm a veteran teacher and a lifelong serial side hustler. Through one-on-one coaching and leading school-wide professional development workshops, I've helped many teachers launch their side hustles. And now, it's your turn. So grab a notebook and your favorite pen, because today is the day we start building your After School Empire. All right, so Natae, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your background in education.
Yes. So I was a school counselor for many years, like 15 years in the state of Tennessee, serving in public school systems in various K through 12 schools. And not K through 12 like as one school, like serving, pre-K through 5 or middle school or 9 through 12. And it was really a blessing. Of course, I was in person and then went remote through COVID. But sometime during that time, was able to go back to school to pursue my PhD. And that's when I transitioned out of school counseling. And now I actually teach people to be future school counselors. So I'm a professor at Liberty University in their graduate counseling program, mostly teaching in the school counseling grad program for those wonderful people who are going to go forth and be school counselors themselves one day.
Awesome. So you started out working in K-12, you got your PhD, then you were able to transition into working at the university level. That's fantastic. So 2 former Blue Devils, we both went on to get our PhDs. I actually went down a level. I went from teaching high school to teaching middle school. So I always said there's a special place in heaven for middle school teachers. I just never expected to see it one day. The Lord has a sense of humor. So tell us a little bit about your side hustle.
Yeah, so it's interesting and unique. So being a person that's been in the counseling field many years, one thing I was curious about was kind of transitioning from being a school counselor to getting LPC, which is licensed professional counselor. And that is kind of where a lot of people, there's some confusion about like, what is counseling? What is therapy? What credentials do you have to have? And so in the world of professional counseling, most of the time you'll hear that terminology LPC, being licensed professional counselor, meaning that you work in a more like clinical mental health type setting. And that could be like private practice or, in a facility or in there's many different settings that it could apply. But while I was still a school counselor, I took the extra steps to work toward getting LPC. And it's a process that requires a couple of years of supervision, making sure that you have certain mental health classes that are kind of typically outside of the school counseling realm and a little more like clinical focused. But once I did that, I was still a school counselor. And so before I transitioned to faculty, I had a few years where I had the, like you call it, the side hustle of having that LPC. So having like a private practice and being a school counselor, which was really a blessing. And so what that looked like for me, well, it's also unique because you mentioned running therapy, which is kind of my area of expertise. So my practice offers a unique technique in counseling that's movement-based. And so rather than meeting clients in, a traditional office setting, I meet them outdoors at an agreed upon place for movement-based sessions for either walk and talk therapy or running therapy. And it's not something that I made up. It's actually something that of course I didn't just make it up. It has existed for years. There's so much research to support it. And the research really is based on how movement is good for mental health, like actually overwhelmingly good for mental health. There were, and there are still some practitioners in the United States. It's kind of like it's a small amount of people that actually provide these services, but it is growing as we are spreading the word about how important movement is for mental health and how to integrate it into therapeutic practices. So basically, I'm one of the kind of minority people that are in the counseling/therapy field that provide those services that are outside, outdoors, moving bodies, walking with clients, talking with clients, or even running with clients if that's their preference, while we engage in.
That would not be my preference. I would rather play leapfrog with the unicorn than take off running somewhere.
So let me say,
I would be a walk and talk kind of guy.
Yeah. So it's not like, well, running is better than walking. It's not like that at all. It's all about really just moving your body. The pace doesn't matter. It's never focused on pace. It's never focused on distance. It's that forward motion. And I can get into some of the science of it if you're interested in a short version. But basically, when you are moving your body in a repetitive motion with gross motor areas like your legs, for example, it does something to the brain. It triggers like neurological functions that increase thought processes. It increases like the amount of oxygen you have in the brain, which stimulate areas that actually make people think better, is what the science says.
So is it just going to be like a dopamine serotonin release?
Well, you hear about that stuff, right? Like runner's high type thing, but there's actually more to it than that. And there's science. There's all these different sciences. Like it's multifaceted. Like, for example, there's sciences that say forward movement. When your body recognizes that it's moving forward in space, it just like triggers better thought processes. And actually, there's what I focus a lot on, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but in the world of counseling, there's a very efficient technique in counseling called EMDR. I don't know if you've heard of it. Okay. And
I have. Yep.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so it's actually, people will say it's kind of the number one therapy technique for trauma, but truly like they use it to treat anything. So what's interesting about EMDR is that the founder of EMDR discovered it as she was going for a walk herself. She recognized that as she was walking, her eyes were sweeping back and forth kind of over the pavement just naturally. And she was kind of sorting through some things in her brain, just personal things, and realized like, wow, I feel better. What's going on with this? Well, there's ties to EMDR and the REM cycle. So you think about sleeping in the REM cycle. That's when your eyes are moving like back and forth really fast. That's what we know. Like during that time, it's when you're really processing your thoughts for the day. So like, for example, if a person experiences a trauma, then those thoughts are not properly processed. And so that's why they're kind of like hung in the brain in an inappropriate place, and people like re-experience it. They were in inappropriate times or whatever. So they use EMDR to kind of replicate that eye movement so that thought can be reprocessed and filed away properly, if you will, so that the struggle is no longer there. Well, if you think about it, walking, running, really any movement, I like to joke and say, unless you skip left day, because it's bilateral stimulation. EMDR, a lot of times we think about it being visual, but truly you can do it with any type of bilateral stimulation. It can be audio, it can be tactile. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's like a lot of therapy that's based on like tapping where it's alternating. And so truly what you're doing is you're stimulating like opposite sides of your brains repetitively, and it aids in thought processing. And so that's what we're doing. One of the aspects of it in movement-based therapy, it's not all about like run and get like a runner's high and then you'll feel better. It's truly like all these other components that aid in your mental health.
Gotcha. So I love that you have a niche. You're not just doing counseling. You have niched down even more and are doing the movement based. I'm a big fan of Pat Flynn. He hosts Smart Passive Income, one of the OGs of the side hustle world in the podcasting realm. And his big saying is the riches are in the niches. If you can find ways of having a targeted demographic that you're serving with your side hustle, you're not just becoming best at what you do, you're becoming one of the only people that do what you do. So tell me how you decided that you were going to, rather than just being a licensed counselor, start focusing specifically on the niche of doing the movement-based or doing the running and walking-based therapy.
Yeah, good question. So that actually came from my personal experience. So when I was in grad school, and it's funny when you say when you're in grad school, like when you've been in grad school, like a lot of different times. But when I was in grad school the first time, working on my master's, I was running for my own just health, but like back then, really physical health, because I've been an avid runner for over 20 years now. And so one day I was running, and I was running with a colleague and was just talking about, the hardships of grad school, right? Like how it's a challenge to, whether it's grad school or whatever you're doing, we're all balancing things. We all have so many things on our plate. And so I was just running with this colleague and talking, just like, as friends would when they're, spending time together. And when I completed that run, I remember saying to that friend, this has got to be some sort of therapy. There's all these therapies. There's equine therapy, and there's, blah, blah, blah specializations. I mean, the list goes on and on. So that day I went to my computer and Googled running therapy, and voila, it existed. And it had existed since the 1970s, at least. And I was like, why haven't I heard of this? I'm in grad school for counseling right now. Well, like you're saying, it's one of those niche areas. So that's when I started diving into the research that existed, but it just wasn't something you heard a lot about because, statistics show we're a very sedentary country. And people are always looking for quick fixes. And we have an abundance of psychotropic medications. This is really another topic, but I don't want to steer too far. But I mean, why do hard things when people can do easy things, So I dive into the research. So really, I truly start the research, 20 years ago of running therapy and all the science behind it. And just kind of like made myself an expert on it. And so when I went back for my PhD, I already had all this information. I had reached out to the contacts, who were really the founding fathers and made contact. But the problem was at that point, I did not have an LPC. I wasn't a licensed professional counselor. So as a school counselor, I couldn't implement those services to the public. However, when I started gaining all that information, I did start integrating those things into my school counseling techniques. And so later in my school counseling years, I would integrate movement into my sessions with students as often as possible. I would get them out of my office. We would go for a walk around the school. We would be, just taking laps around the building if the weather wasn't permitting, because it just would foster conversation so much better. So fast forward a little bit, got the LPC, and I had done the research, and there was really no longer a certification to become a running therapist in the United States. It had fizzled really when the founder had passed away. But there were still followers of it, and there were no regulations, and there still aren't, about being a walk and talk therapist in the United States. Like for some sort of therapies, you have to be certified. But for walk and talk,
you have like your subspecialties.
Right. Now, thankfully now there is. And so I did put that on my name. If you can post that in there. There is now, you can become a certified walk and talk therapist. And that gives you the option, to move in whatever way, like walking or running. So anyway, get the LPC, and there is no certification required. So I immediately knew, like, this is my passion. I have the expertise because I've done all this research just on my own. I'm ready to integrate it. I have talked to other practitioners about how they make it happen in their practices, and it's unique because you need different things. Like you need your informed consent to look different, right? Like most of the time you're sitting in a room with a person and no one else will see you. Well, you've got other things to take into consideration. Like if we're walking along a greenway or a path, what do we do if we run into another person?
Colleagues may see him out in public, right, or something.
Or what do we do if we run into someone who I mean, it's different if we run into a stranger because we typically just look like, you always look like two people just walking together, which is very normal. But there are just other things to consider. And because we're in public.
Well, and trying to cut down, if you're walking with a gentleman and somebody from church sees him walking with another lady.
Yes.
How does that conversation get handled?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, really good point. So there are other things to consider, but that being said, it doesn't make it unattainable. It just means that as a counselor, you just have to kind of think, we're thinking differently here.
Gotcha. So you have your own experience, kind of that realization, hey, this is something that is helping me in this moment, could help others. You do the research, eventually you do in and out, get your certification. I know it went away for a while, it came back. So tell me about getting your first customers. Was it something that you had already existing clientele and you're like, hey, this is something I want to try? Or did you completely pivot the way that you were marketing yourself and marketing your services to try to specifically attract people who would be interested in this movement-based therapy?
Yeah, good question. So for me, it was from the very beginning marketing myself like this is what I offer. Because one thing that I love about movement-based therapy is that you don't have to have an office. You just totally get rid of that. The only services I offer are virtual and in person for walk and talk or running. And so on my website, on other platforms, I come up front with that because some people are not looking for that. They want an option to have a traditional therapy experience. And so that's not me. I'm not a good fit for them. Being a counselor, it's all about being a good fit for someone. And so that's just that I marketed myself, as a person that offered movement-based sessions, which is, looking for a unique clientele. I understand that, but that's okay because maybe like many other educators, they're doing something on the side. I can't afford to have my side thing to be something big or overwhelming. I keep it very small specifically because that is all I can do. That's all I want to do. And that's all I need to do for work-life balance.
So how many clients are you capping yourself at any given point?
Yeah, so good question. So per my university contract, so it's interesting with counseling because many of us do have the, I'm doing this in quotation marks here, the side hustle. I mean, it's something we're passionate about and we love it. And as we're teaching counseling, we want to stay fresh in counseling because counseling is one of those living fields that's always changing. And you have to stay abreast of the topics, of the techniques. And so since we are a full-time core faculty, they ask us, not to teach more or not to have some sort of something, teaching, counseling, whatever. That's more than 10 hours of our time per week. My client caseload varies, but for example, right now I have 3 clients. That's plenty. It's not that I'm seeking more. And so it's funny when you ask me about marketing myself, I do have a website and I do have social media. But just last week, I realized that I told you this, my website was down and I didn't even know it, but I didn't care because I don't need it. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for numbers. And I realized it could be totally different with other, people of their situations. So that is something I have to get on and fix that.
Hey there, we'll get right back to the episode, but I want to take a moment to ask you to answer one question. Are you a person who achieves their goals or one who gives up on their goals? Most of us, if we're being really, really honest, tend to abandon our goals. Don't believe me? Do a self-check of how many New Year's resolutions you've kept. Ouch, did that hurt? The truth is, most of us don't stop pursuing our goals because our hearts are in the wrong place, but rather because we're awful at verbalizing what we truly want to achieve. Having a well-defined goal is the foundation to achieving success. For that reason, I put together a free workshop called Goal Setting for Teacher Hustlers. In this workshop, you'll learn how to apply the SMART goal framework to your side hustle and get some tips to avoid setting yourself up for failure. This course is 100% free and there are no upsells. I just wanted to give you a resource that can help you start your side hustle pursuits on the right foot. To register, just go to www.afterschoolemempire.com/goals. Again, that's afterschoolemempire.com/goals. Do yourself a favor and check it out. Now back to the show. That's awesome. So, my wife likes to call side hustling hobby jobs. And I would joke, I'm like, well, hobbies are something that you do because you enjoy it, but you're not getting paid to do it. Side hustles, we're being intentional about doing this because we want to get paid. So how are you getting paid through this? Is it by the hour? Are they buying monthly subscriptions or memberships to you? What does that payment process look like? How are you generating your income?
Yeah, good question. So in the traditional world of counseling and therapy, people typically pay by their session. So, they pay individually per their scheduled session. So it's never like, because you don't know how people's mental health is going to progress, right? Like I can't predict that. I can't say, 6 sessions and you're great. It doesn't work like that. So it's always just one session at a time. And it's very individualized. So it's not like I can say, well, we meet 4 times a month. It doesn't work like that. Some people, their needs are more intense at the time. And so we meet weekly, but ultimately our goal is to lessen our meetings, until we conclude therapeutic services. And so we might start weekly, then go to bi-weekly, and then, monthly or whatever until the person, we feel like that they are ready to conclude therapy. Now, let me say my practice is unique here in that I choose not to take insurance. And so some people with LPC will, because I know many individuals, they have insurance and they're looking to use the benefits of it. My choice is just different. It's preference of why I do that. And so mine is private pay only. And so they pay me typically through some electronic funds type transfer.
Gotcha.
And it's just that simple.
So I like that you said that your goal is to try to make it where ultimately you're not needed anymore. I've always therapy to marketing, and that the goal of marketing is to advertise yourself so well. In the future, you no longer have to pay for marketing services because you just be a known entity. And, with therapy, it's the same, that eventually you get to a point where you've developed the coping mechanisms, the skills, the abilities that you need so that you aren't necessarily as dependent on someone else to help you work through those issues. So, super busy. You are college professor, and I know everything that goes along with that. My wife's a college professor, so service, teaching, read, all that fun stuff. Plus, you're a mom, you're a wife. I know you serve in your local community and your faith community and stuff. How are you balancing all of that with your side hustle?
Yeah, good question. Sometimes it feels like the balance is not always there, but I try very diligently to keep a work-life balance. And like I said earlier, how I said I have 3 clients right now and that's all I want? Well, that's part of that balance. Like, if someone thought me, and I think one thing, okay, maybe let me back up here. I'm going to just say this word, boundaries, right? That's such a good therapy word that I talk to so many clients about, but I have to live that life too, right? Like maybe 3 clients and that's plenty. Or if a client reaches out and their schedule doesn't fit with what I have to offer, I had to get to that place of, okay, these are my open areas that fit in my life because, in the faculty world, every semester my schedule is going to change probably as to when I'm teaching class or whatever. And my children are at an age where they're young and they're all at home. And my number one priority is, my wifely duties and my motherly duties. And so if now, I'm at this point of, okay, if I have a client and they're a good fit, but they can't fit into my schedule, then that is just how it's going to be at this point. Maybe perhaps another time, it will work, but I have to set that boundary for myself of like, these are the times that I have that don't interfere with other times. And if someone is outside of that time, then I'm going to need to refer to someone else because I need to keep those boundaries for my own mental health and for the health of my family and the disabilities that I have.
Absolutely. And I do talk with teachers when I'm doing, one-on-one coaching or I'm doing in services on side hustling for teachers. That's actually one of the things that I stress is we don't need to look at side hustling as a grind. It's not another thing to make us feel miserable and to rob us of our time. And so like in my home, when I started my first podcast, like my wife and I talked and we set the boundary that I don't schedule interviews during the school year until after the boys have been gone down so that I'm there to help, put them down and get them tucked in. So daddy's doing his thing, but it's going after because we can always use extra money, but being able to set those hard boundaries are, it's definitely critical to be able to keep a side hustle going and not having to do all of my other responsibilities have been taken care of first. And so setting those hard boundaries, which can be difficult, especially when you're seeing dollar signs as a teacher. shut it down for either your own familial health or your own physical and mental health, saying, I'm going to work on it this time. And that's why that's actually my key differentiation between a part-time job and a side hustle, is that sense of autonomy. If you were working for a practice and you were depending on, your movement-based therapy clients to pay your bills, then you would have to take on more and more and more to be able to, provide for your family. But for you saying, hey, this is a side hustle, you can cut it off at 3 and it's not going to be, a detriment to your family. So what would you say is probably your biggest lesson learned in doing this? What's something that maybe you either fell flat and you were like, man, I wish I had known this before I did that, or something that you tried that you were like, this was that moment where I knew this was going to work?
When I think about those questions, I have 2 thoughts that pop in my mind. And so the one thought is, sometimes things feel unattainable, just your dreams or your hopes or whatever. And I just want to encourage others to know that, the time is going to pass regardless. So take those steps, when those doors are opened for you, and be prepared to just go forth in faith. And then another thought there is about when you were talking about failure or whatever, I don't know that failure is not, it doesn't feel like it aligns with me. But one thing I think about a lot is imposter syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Oh, absolutely.
So, it's,
absolutely.
It's a real thing. And especially if you're doing something outside of your typical area, if it's education and you're doing something outside of there, it could very easily feel impostery in your life, right? Because you are doing something outside of your typical box. And that's something I've struggled with as well throughout the years. But I just want to encourage, I love that saying, fake it till you make it. And truly, you're not faking it. When you have set yourself up for success, things I think perhaps, and maybe this is just me, I don't know if other people have had this experience, but doing something new, doing something different, even though you're well prepared, it's always just the getting in there and doing it. And then one day it kind of clicks of I had those anxious thoughts or those anxious tendencies, but I am well prepared. I am the person that's capable of these things. And I think it just comes with time.
When my wife and I were working on our PhDs, our top hat and cane until the letters are after your name. So that was our version of fake it till you make it. Just do what you got to do until you get those letters. Well, Natae, this has been so awesome. Find out more about your practice, your movement-based therapy. Where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I use my Instagram kind of as my professional account, and that would be a great way to start reaching out to me. Dr. Feenstra runs. I can give you that information.
Yeah, we'll make sure to link it up in the show notes as well.
Mm-hmm. But if you're ever looking for a therapist at all, psychologytoday.com is a wonderful research. Just if people are wanting to know more about, mental health services in their area in general. But I'm also listed there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
It's my pleasure. Bless you all, teachers. Keep going.
For more resources and support, be sure to visit www.afterschoolempire.com and sign up for my mailing list. I promise not to spam you, and you'll be the first to know about new side hustle resources that are available from After School Empire. Until next time, remember, people want to give you money. You just have to find a reason for them to do so.